The breaking news comes from Toronto, where a new detailed report is shedding light on racial profiling and discrimination by the Toronto Police Service. It shows Black people in the city are far more likely to be injured or even killed during an altercation with police. The report was put together by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. This is an interim report. It did release those findings at a news conference this morning.
Each person in Toronto, regardless of their race or the neighborhood they live in, should be able to go about their daily life free from discrimination and harassment. The essence of freedom is being able to fulfill our full potential and contribute to society. Racial discrimination is an affront to freedom. A collective impact includes analysis of quantitative data obtained from the Special Investigations Unit. It includes a review of SIU directors' reports, which have never before been released to the public. It highlights legal decisions that have found discrimination against Black persons by the Toronto Police. A collective impact summarizes our engagement with about 130 Black people across the city. This interim report is the latest in a body of reports, findings, and recommendations over the past 30 years that point to persistent concerns about anti-Black racism in policing in Toronto.
So that's it in a nutshell. But CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick was at that news conference in Toronto as well. She joins me live from there. You take me through what stood out for you, Megan.
Well, Suhana, the work of the Commission has been underway for more than a year, and as you mentioned, this is the interim report, and it really zeroed in on data that it got from the SIU, so focusing on incidents between Toronto Police and members of the Black community where serious injury or bodily harm was caused or death. And the report is saying that the findings from that data confirm longstanding concerns from members of the Black community that its members are overrepresented in these kinds of incidents. So if we look at the hard numbers, the raw data that this report has, shows things like how a Black person in Toronto is 20 times more likely than a white person to be involved in a fatal shooting with Toronto Police, 11 times more likely to be involved in a deadly encounter, 4 times more likely to be involved in an incident where there was use of force. They looked at the data from the SIU, but also looked at reports from the SIU director, looking at a number of themes, Suhana, from those reports, including things about possible misconduct by police officers, officers not cooperating in SIU investigations, incidents where the person involved shouldn't have been arrested in the first place or stopped in the first place. In addition to looking at the numbers, though, they also interviewed a number of people from the Black community in Toronto, some 130 people. So the report was trying to combine the data with personal experiences to paint a picture of what's going on here in Toronto. Let's take a listen to a bit more of what the Commissioner said during the news conference.
The Ontario Human Rights Commission's findings in a collective impact are disturbing, and they demand an explanation. At this interim stage, we are calling on the Toronto Police to acknowledge the Commission's very serious human rights concerns. We're calling on the board to mandate the collection and public release of race-based data.
So those are some of their recommendations so far that they're looking at, Suhana. But again, this is just an interim report. There's a lot of work left to be done by the Commission. The next phase involves drilling down even more into data. They're waiting for some more data from the Toronto Police. They're going to look at lower uses of force. This was only looking at the most serious cases. So they're going to look at other uses of force. They're going to look at what's known as carding practices, arrests and charges laid. And they're also going to look at a broader picture of the Toronto Police, looking at its culture, its training practices, its policies. So a lot more to come, and the final report is expected sometime in 2020.
Now, the Toronto Police Service, how is it responding, and the board as well?
Yeah, they put out a joint statement saying that they understand that some members of the the Black community in Toronto feel a sense of distrust, and they acknowledge that. They also say, though, in their statement that no institution or organization is immune from bias, but they say they are committed and resolved to addressing these issues. They said in their statement that they will continue to be open to exploring the overall approach of the use of force by the Toronto Police. But again, they say other institutions and levels of government need to be part of this mandate, that they can't do it alone. And they also raised some questions about the data in this report, Suhana. So a little bit on the defensive, perhaps, in some part of the statement that they put out. But again, they're saying this is nothing new. They have been working on these issues, addressing these concerns for a number of years now.
And finally, I spoke with somebody from the Black community here in Toronto who said, you know, it is time to move forward, and the report really doesn't give them new information, but perhaps it spurs that that desire to affect change. What are you hearing from the Black community in the city, Megan?
Yeah, they were here, some members, and spoke at the news conference as well, and sort of echoed that sentiment, Suhana, saying what's in this report is nothing new to them. They know that this happens. This is these kinds of incidents are experienced every day, they say, here in Toronto. But really, this report, they were saying, validates their concerns and their experiences, illustrates them, puts it out there for everyone to see, and tries to keep this issue on the front burner. But there is a sense of frustration. One of the advocates here said it's disheartening that these kinds of reports still need to be put out. Here's more of what she said.
What is happening now has been happening for decades. It is wrong. It is racist. It must be stopped. The time has come. It is time. It is time.
And she also had a message to younger members of the Black community here in Toronto, Suhana, encouraging them to resist the status quo, to keep using their voices. She said that's important for their voices to be heard and for them to help hold all levels of government accountable.
Thanks for that, Megan. That's CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Toronto.